Hey, Mr. C. Other that software that I give you with those links, I can't find anything else to make it to where I can record my screen and you hear my voice. This is the best I got. So I can send you those other links again. It's not on YouTube, but this one will be, but it's not gonna look as nice. I'm This one's gonna be a lot shorter than the other one, but I'm just gonna go ahead and power through this one. So here's the content, and here's everybody's chapters. I have it split up between the chapter they did and the person who did them. So this one's Miss Rester. So her objectives that she put on for her thing was every action we take is influenced by chemistry. There isn't a single moment when we aren't influenced by chemical material or chemical process. The analysis of hazardous materials by emergency responders accomplishes the primary goal of broadening their sense of inquiry when examining accident scenes involving hazardous materials. Without the knowledge acquired from the study of hazardous materials, emergency responders are severely limited when they must select a course of action during the duty of performance of duty. The aim of the introduction or chapter 1 is to learn about the general nature of the details that the CPSC requires on labels affixed to consumer products or consumer product containers. In conjunction with going over safety data sheets and how they apply to OSHA's 16 categories of hazardous chemical knowledge criteria. After reading the chapter, you should be able to identify the physical or health hazards associated with a GHS pictogram, as well as interpret the numbers entered into the top 3/4 of the hazard diamonds. So, the Consumer Product Safety Commission. This was passed first by Congress, the Federal Hazardous Substances Act in 1960. Following that, it was changed to focus on protecting consumers from unintentional exposure to harmful substances found in consumer goods. The statute that is administered by this statute is administered by the CPSC. The CPSC complies with its congressional mandate by requiring manufacturers to place adequate labeling on the packages of consumer products containing hazardous substances. This labeling information is mainly aimed at customers, but it may be useful to emergency responders as well as others. According to 16 CFR, the CPSC specifies the following details to be clearly and conspicuously displayed on labels affixed to containers and consumer goods containing hazardous substances. So it got to have the manufacturers, packers, distributors, or sellers' name and address. Each hazardous ingredient common or normal name, as well as its chemical name. For corrosive, extremely flammable, or highly toxic materials, use the signal word, whichever one it may correlate with. It has to have the signal word. So the signal word caution appears on items that are least dangerous to the consumer. Warning appears on products that are harmful or more harmful than the ones than with the caution sticker, and danger appears on the toxic or corrosive products. The CPSC requires manufacturers to include the following minimum details on their labels. So they gotta have advisory warnings, initial precautionary statement identifying the primary hazards associated with the product use, steps the consumer can take to minimize or eliminate the risk of danger during the storage handling, common names for hazardous ingredients, and first aid instructions. These requirements are extremely important for emergency workers who can learn about the contents of this product by reading the label information. So, the 16 categories. So I'm just going to go ahead. So a safety data sheet must discuss the following components according to OSHA. So they got to have hazardous chemical identification, hazards identification, chemical composition and information on ingredients, first aid measures, firefighting measures, accidental release measures, handling and storage information, physical and chemical properties, chemical stability and reactivity, toxicology properties, ecological information, disposal consideration, transport information, regulatory information, and other information deemed important. SDS stands for Safety Data Sheet and is a technical bulletin that contains specific information regarding a hazardous chemical. Every SDS has to be updated to meet JHS requirements. All workers who are exposed to a dangerous chemical at work must be given a copy of the SDS as well as instruction on how to use it. So the GHS pictogram. There are two types of pictograms. The GHS pictogram which appears on a chemical product label, transport pictograms, which appear when goods are transported in commerce. The DHS pictograms associated with the hazards exhibited by chemical products are black and white, red bordered, diamond-shaped warning signs. On the same container label, several pictograms can be shown to warn the observer to possible hazards presented by the container's contents. Because of OSHA's adoption of DHS, each chemical manufacturer, distributor, and importer must choose the correct pictograms to represent their items. By looking at the labels and understanding the importance of pictograms, emergency responders will be able to quickly identify the dangers associated with the chemical products. So, hazard diamond. The NFPA suggests the number codes inside the top 3 quadrants of a diamond-shaped symbol painted on or otherwise affixed to the exterior surfaces of storage tanks to convey hazard information. The number codes indicate the relative degree of flammability, instability hazards of substances contained inside each tank. Starting with the left-hand quadrant and working clockwise, firefighters cross-reference each number with relevant data in the bottom quadrant. Special codes are given. Each number is then shown at the top of the 3 quadrants of the hazard diamond, which is a diamond-shaped diagram. Beginning in the left-hand quadrant and working clockwise, each quadrant of the diamond is color-coded blue for health hazard, red for fire hazard, yellow for instability hazard. When firefighters first experience a fire in a storage tank, this combination of data helps them decide which actions to take and which not to. So, in conclusion, our technology-based society needs hazardous materials to operate. They are used in processing and manufacturing a wide range of goods. Their usage has aided in the advancement of humanity, allowing us to live longer, healthier, and more convenient and enjoyable lives. The dangerous nature of hazardous materials is revealed when they are used inappropriately, stored, shipped, or used. It would not only be unrealistic, but also impractical, and in some cases impossible to remove them from our society. Instead, we must learn to live safely. We must learn to live safely in their presence and effectively respond to emergency-related accidents they cause in order to minimize the loss of life, property, and protect the environment. First responders who have a well-rounded knowledge on how to properly handle, transport, and identify hazardous materials have a far better chance of selecting the best course of action when faced with hazmat. Understanding what a DHS pictogram is and how to identify a hazard diamond can allow firefighters to successfully and safely respond to hazmat incidents. So next is me. I went over the DOT hazardous material regulations. So hazardous material, HM, any substance or material that is in any form that presents a potential threat to human health when mishandled. So the table that covers HMs is 49 CFR 171 to 1989. So here's an example of what it is. It displays chemical names with some technical names. In the specific 49 CFR, only chapters 1 through 7 are important to emergency responders. Shipping names. The name of a product must be used on a HM table unless the item is not listed or entirely correct. They may use the 7 general descriptions. The names must be accurate and most closely fitting to the item being transported. When a material is forbidden in column 3, it means that the material cannot be transported. Most forbidden materials are explosives, ready combustible solids, self-heating materials, and self-reactive materials. So hazardous class and divisions. There are 9 classes and a other section a hazard can be categorized in. So hazards can be put in more than one class. So here's some examples. So on this chart over here, I screenshot it, put it on there. So hazard class 1, but different divisions. UN NA numbers. These are used by the Department of Transportation to categorize hazardous materials. So UN, United Nations, NA, North American numbers are used to rapidly convey important information about the product. UN NA numbers are listed in column 4 of the HM table. The emergency response guide should be referenced when the UN NA number is identified. Shipping papers. So it's required by 49 CFR to be in the truck and must match what's being loaded. So a shipping paper can be a shipping order, manifest, railroad bill, a railroad way bill, etc. The shipping paper must contain these components in order: the UN NA number, proper shipping name, primary hazard class, subsidiary hazard class if applicable, and packing group if applicable. The information on these papers must be in English. The shipping description must be detailed in units, whether or not it is a hazardous material. Description. So description must have proper shipping name, UN, NA class, hazard class, and packing group. Weight, and at the bottom, emergency contacts. The DOT, for DOT purposes in the Appendix A of 49 CFR, there are reportable quantities if a product goes above a predetermined threshold. If so, it must be reported to the National Response Center. And here's what that would look like. Location of shipping papers during transit. So the DOT requires drivers to keep shipping papers away from or clearly identifiable from other papers. If at the controls, the shipping paper must be within immediate reach and visible. If away from the controls, the shipping paper must be in the holder or on the seat of the driver. So DOT labeling requirements. It requires shippers to affix the required warning label on the outside of surfaces. The required label can be found on column 6 on the HM table. The label must be diamond-shaped, color-coded to specify the hazard class and possible picture. Affix the specific label on the surface of the package near the proper shipping name. Duplicate labels are displayed on at least 2 sides. So marking requirements. So they must be written or affixed on the packaging. They've got to be in English. Specification marking must have the name, address, symbol of manufacturer, approval agency, letter or numerals to identify the standard. Must be on packaging and unobstructed by any advertisements. Common required markings can be found on the table 6.5-A through 6.5-M and 6.5-O to 6.5-W. Placarding requirements. So under 49 CFR, carriers must display them in plain view, one or more placards on each side and end. Carriers are ultimately bear the responsibility for choice and placement of placards. Column 3 of the HM table can be used to select an appropriate placard. All applicable placards must be displayed at all times when transporting, regardless of the amount. When transporting multiple types of hazardous materials, the carrier must display applicable placards for each HM. Carriers transporting any hazardous materials must have an issued CDL within hazardous material endorsement. Responding to incidents involving the release of hazardous materials. So they got to identify the material by SDS. They can identify by either SDS, shipping paper, placards, UN, NA number, to name a few. The ERG should be used as a primary reference. The ERG should be in emergency, shippers, and carrier vehicles at all times. Using identifiers, use the yellow section for the UN NA number or the blue section for the names of hazardous materials to see what orange page is needed for the incident. Next up, so we got Mr. Nguyen with corrosive materials. What is a corrosive material? The DOT defines a corrosive material as a solid or liquid that causes full thickness destruction of the site of human skin at the site of contact. In other words, anything that can cause destruction of living tissue by chemical action. Substance can be in gas, liquid, or solid form. Another name for this kind of substance is acids or bases. So corrosive materials. Corrosive materials can be classified as a strong acid or a strong base or alkaline. And as you look at the scale, if you start heading towards the middle to the neutral zone, you get weak acids and bases. So here's the scale he is referring to. What determines how strong or weak an acid or base is by the substance's ability to form hydrated hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions when dissolved in water. The higher the concentration in water, the stronger, or the less concentration, the weaker. Corrosive materials. So the idea that all acids are harmful and destructive is wrong. In fact, acids can be found everywhere. Acids and bases have many uses in our everyday lives. They are part of our cleaning products in home and workstations and even in medicine. An example would be a bleach to clean your house. Your car would not run if not for the battery, which has battery acids inside. You yourself inside of you have acids in your stomach to break down food. Some people with acid reflux must take a base tablet to stop heartburn. So, continuing, some corrosive materials are very hazardous to health if ingested, inhaled, or unattended, or have unattended exposure. That's why it is mandated by law that all workers who need to work around corrosive materials need to have some knowledge of the chemical and training, and where to find the SDS in case of accidents. As with all hazmat, you must follow instructions to keep for cleanup or exposure. For example, if your skin is exposed to sulfuric acid, the SDS might tell you to flush with large amounts of water or flush with large amounts of water for at least 10 minutes. And if ingested, some help might be found by calling the Poison Control Center, who might tell you to go to the hospital as soon as possible and to not induce vomiting. When dealing with hazmat, always remember to have the right PPE to prevent exposure to begin with. Corrosive materials are categorized as a class 8 by the DOT. This also means that there are strict shipping requirements, some of which are proper labels need to be on every container, the right shipping papers must be accessible in place, and proper markings and warning signs posted on the truck to identify the substance and toxic levels and more. There are limits to how much is allowed to be shipped at a time, but that depends on the substance and how toxic it is. What does it mean for us? So as firefighters, we might have to deal with accidents involving corrosive hazmat, but before you go rush into things, remember to identify what you're dealing with from a safe distance and get all the information you can get first to help make a better informed decision. And never do anything you are not qualified to do. If you must go into a red zone of a hazmat incident, make sure you have the right PPE. For firefighters, we must try to stop the flow of acid from reaching gutters and drains, but we might have to dilute the hazmat with large amounts of water depending on the substance. So next up, we got Mr. Sakuchi. Toxic substances is what he goes over. So toxic substances, they are certain substances that cause death, illness, injury, or incapacitation when the body is exposed to them in relatively small quantities. These substances are called toxic substances, toxicants, or poisons. Transporting toxic substances. The DOT regulates the transportation of several types of toxic substances by gases, poisonous by inhalation, poisonous materials, and infectious substances. The DOT requires shippers and carriers to comply with all applicable labeling, marking, and placarding requirements. How does toxic enter the body? So there's ingestion, skin absorption, inhalation. So ingestion is going through your mouth, getting to your stomach. Skin absorption is going through your dermis layer. So toxic substances penetrate the epidermis, the outermost skin layer, and enter the underlying dermis or subcutaneous tissue, from which they may be further absorbed into the circulatory system and spread throughout the body. Inhalation is the route responsible for the movement of gases, vapors, and fumes through components of the respiratory system. Common ways toxic substances can affect health. So a hemotoxin, it reduces the function of the blood's hemoglobin and deprives the tissue of oxygen. A hepatotoxicant, a substance that causes liver damage. A nephrotoxicant causes kidney damage. A neurotoxicant it affects the central nervous system. A respiratory toxicant, a substance that adversely affects the nasal passage, pharynx, trachea, bronchi, and lungs. A reproductive toxicant, a substance that adversely affects sexual function and fertility in adults, as well as development of their offspring. So toxicity in the fire scene. The fire scene is usually an extremely dangerous environment. Even if all its physical hazards could be eliminated, the atmosphere will still be filled with smoke, dust, toxic gases, and other hazardous substances. The potential for illness and death at the fire scene most often result when individuals are exposed to smoke and toxic gases produced. So next up, we got Mr. Gonzalez with explosive materials. So chemistry of some explosive materials. So explosives is a chemical or nuclear material that can be initiated to undergo rapid self-propagating decomposition that results in the formation of more stable substances, the liberation of heat, and the development of a sudden pressure effect or blast by action of heat on the gases produced during the decomposition. Chemistry of some explosives. So some common chemical explosive components that you might encounter are hunting ammunition, charging devices for mining or oil drilling operations, old wartime artillery and munitions, old military vehicles such as plane cockpits and pylons, and undeployed airbags. So, some explosives can be found as components in mass destruction weapons used in terrorism, and some examples of that are in 2000, Al Qaeda attacked the USS Cole with a boat filled with explosives in Yemen, killing 17 American soldiers. 2013, two Chechens detonated explosives during the Boston Marathon, killing 3 people and injuring over 260 people. Chemistry of some explosives. There are generally two types of explosives that are most commonly found. So they are explosive substances are unique compounds that can be inorganic or organic, which represent an oxidizing and reducing agent that are ready to detonate or can be made to detonate. Explosive articles are items that are made with explosive substances such as cartridges or bombs. Most circumstances, the explosive substance is set off the explosive article by mechanical, electrical, chemical, or hydrostatic trigger. Detonation is a decomposition of an explosive and can be expressed by an equation. The detonation is associated with a rapid passing of energy wave through a body of an explosive. This energy wave is called the detonation velocity. Detonation velocity is not only a form of energy generated from an explosive. Explosives also generate high temperatures, and this energy is called detonation temperature. Emergency responders that are responding to incidents involving explosives that has been disowned or are abandoned should always suspect there are active explosives on the scene. Upon arriving to a scene, all suspected material that might contain explosive material are to be removed to a total explosive containment vessel that explosive experts can handle, that can transport, dispose of, and sample the explosive. Prior to the disposal of the materials, EPA should be contacted to use a method that is best protects the public and environmental health. So now we got Mr. Holmes going over radioactive materials. So radioactive materials. According to the DOT, radioactive materials are materials that contain one or more isotopes for which both the activity concentration and the total activity in the consignment. Simply put, they are materials that emits ionizing radiation spontaneously. So there are 3 types: alpha, beta, and gamma. So alpha is absorbed through the epidermis and does not pose much of a danger. Beta radiation is similar to alpha, but it goes deeper into the dermis and can cause biological damage. Gamma radiation can cause serious damage to an organism and cannot be stopped from the interior or exterior of the body. This radiation can result in death. So the DOT has rigorous regulations when it comes to transporting radioactive materials. The shipper must include a lot of information in the shipping description that include the shipping name, hazard class 7, and the identification number. So when labeling, it must include placards that are displaying a white and or yellow background associated with its wording: radioactive 1, radioactive yellow 2, radioactive yellow 3. An important thing to note is that when it comes to radioactive materials, if the material is removed from a container and is transported, it is required to be labeled with a placard that says empty. This indicates the container has internal contamination. So when first responders respond to the hazmat scene, they must use extreme caution. They should do so by staying at a safe distance in order to limit or prevent exposure around the contaminated substance or material. Responders should refer to the latest ERG to find the appropriate safe distance and to get a better understanding of the material they are dealing with. The ERG also gives proper procedures for establishing safety zones and what proper PPE is needed. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you, sir.